For 10 years, Isabelle Bradford gave everything to a marriage that gave her nothing in return. Branded barren, discarded without mercy by her wealthy husband, and thrown into the night with nothing but her dignity, she vanished. But miracles don't ask for permission. 1 week later, she discovered she was pregnant. With triplets. She never told him. 10 years later, at the height of his power and the depth of his regret, she returned. Not for revenge. Not for validation. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The Bradford estate stood like a jewel in the heart of Greenwich, Connecticut. 3 stories of sleek glass and gray stone, modernist in every sense, perched on 5 acres of perfectly manicured land. At first glance, it was the very image of success. From the outside, you'd never guess that inside, its halls echoed only with silence and restrained tension. Ethan Bradford, once hailed as a genius disruptor in the tech world, now lived like a king bored of his own empire. At 40, he had more money than most people could imagine, a business empire stretching from Silicon Valley to Singapore, and a mansion that could host senators and sheiks alike. Yet there was no laughter, no joy, only the sound of clinking ice in a whiskey tumbler, late-night phone calls, and arguments that ended with doors slammed, not apologies. Isabelle sat in the sunroom, wrapped in a soft cream shawl despite the warmth of the fireplace. She stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the trees sway in the early spring breeze. 10 years. 10 whole years of marriage and not one child. She had tried everything. Diet changes, meditations, prayer, acupuncture, hormone shots, and the grueling IVF treatments that drained her emotionally and physically. Nothing. Every failed attempt was like a public defeat. Ethan had grown more distant with each passing year. In the early days, he was patient, worried, even protective. They visited doctors together. He would hold her hand and say, "It's us against the world." But that man disappeared long ago. In his place stood a version of Ethan she barely recognized, sharp-tongued, bitter, and cruel in subtle, devastating ways. When he wasn't out on business, he spent his time at exclusive clubs, and Isabelle heard whispers. His name murmured with other women's in charity luncheons and high society galas. He hadn't come home the night before. And when he did arrive late in the morning, wearing the same tuxedo from the night before, Isabelle met him at the marble entryway, her voice calm. "You didn't call," she said gently. Ethan didn't look at her. "I don't need to check in like a teenager. I'm not 12. She ignored the jab. "Were you at the McAllister Gala?" "No," he said flatly. "A lie. She saw the pictures on social media." He stood next to a woman half his age with a champagne flute in hand and his hand on her lower back. The woman wore a red dress Isabelle once owned. "I saw." "You saw what, Isabelle?" he snapped, his eyes finally meeting hers. Cold, hard. "Another reminder that I come home to a woman who can't give me what I need." She blinked. The words were sharp but not new. He had said worse. Still, they sliced through her ribs like glass. "I've done everything I can," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "The doctors." "I don't give a damn about doctors," he roared, stepping closer, towering over her. "You think I care how many shots you've taken? How much we've spent? You think I want to waste another year on hope?" She said nothing. He threw his keys on the console table. "I'm tired of pretending. This house feels like a mausoleum. I walk into every room expecting joy, and all I get is you, sitting in silence, staring into the distance like some abandoned statue." Isabelle bit her lip hard enough to draw blood, but she wouldn't cry. Not in front of him. "I loved you," she whispered. "That was 10 years ago." Then he walked past her into his study and slammed the door behind him. Later that evening, Isabelle wandered through the house, trailing her fingers across old wedding photos. Her ivory gown, his shy smile, the Caribbean honeymoon. Images of a dream that had long since turned into a nightmare. The housekeeper had gone home. The cooks were off for the weekend. The lights in the vast mansion glowed softly. but the silence screamed louder than ever. She went to bed alone, as usual. But this time, something in her shifted. She stared at the ceiling for hours, her body motionless but her mind spinning. It wasn't just loneliness she felt anymore. It was a creeping, heavy sense of being unwanted, a burden in her own life. In the room next door, Ethan was asleep, dead to the world, unaware that the woman he once held so tightly was now contemplating the cost of staying another day in a house with no warmth, no laughter, and no love. And outside, spring crept in, quietly, as if even the seasons knew not to disturb what had already broken. Morning sunlight streamed through the massive arched windows, slicing across the marble floors like golden blades. The Bradford estate, pristine as always, buzzed faintly with the sounds of a distant vacuum cleaner and the clinking of fine china in the kitchen. Silent servants carrying out their duties in hushed reverence. But behind the walls, the rot of a dying marriage continued to spread. Ethan Bradford stood before the mirror in his private dressing room, adjusting the cuffs of his Italian-tailored shirt. He looked impeccable, expensive, like a man who had everything. But his expression was hard, drawn, and restless. He didn't notice the dark circles beneath his eyes or the slight thinning at his temples. Vanity had long since given way to obsession. His phone buzzed on the dresser. "Lunch at Langston House?" the message read. It was from Camille, one of the women he had been seeing, an heiress to a vineyard fortune with sharp cheekbones and a sharper tongue. He smirked. Ethan didn't care about Camille or any of the others. They were ornaments, distractions. None of them had lasted long, but all of them had entertained the idea of giving him what Isabelle couldn't. Children. A legacy. Blood. That was the one thing he was starting to realize he couldn't buy, and it enraged him. Each mistress came with a promise. One even claimed to be late on her cycle, and Ethan, in a haze of desperate hope, booked a private consultation at a fertility clinic. But the test was negative. Another had tried to fake a pregnancy, and when confronted, she laughed in his face and told him maybe he was the one with the problem. That stuck with him longer than he wanted to admit. He never dared to get tested. The idea of confronting the truth, of facing the possibility that he might be the infertile one, was unthinkable. Instead, he clung to the more convenient belief. Isabelle was broken. Isabelle was the problem. Isabelle had robbed him of a future. He left the house without a word to her. Upstairs, Isabelle sat in front of her vanity, brushing her long hair slowly, her movements mechanical. Her reflection looked like a woman she didn't recognize. Tired eyes, expression blank, lips set in a line that hadn't curved into a smile in months. Her phone sat on the table beside her, unread messages from friends who had long since stopped reaching out. She remembered when their home used to host dinner parties and game nights. When her friends would laugh in the kitchen with her, glass of wine in hand, asking about the next fertility treatment and telling her to stay hopeful. Now no one asked anymore. The last IVF round had been the most painful. 2 embryos implanted. They'd waited, fingers crossed, hearts cautiously open. And then bleeding. A confirmation of failure from the doctor. A familiar phone call. Isabelle remembered standing in the cold, sterile clinic bathroom, staring at herself and whispering, "You're not enough." Ethan had barely said a word when she told him. Just nodded. Walked away. That was 2 weeks ago. From the bedroom window, she watched his black luxury SUV pull out of the circular driveway. He was gone again. Probably until late, maybe not until morning. And when he came home, he'd reek of cologne that wasn't hers and whiskey that was too expensive to waste. She turned away from the window, clutching her chest as if trying to hold herself together. Later that evening, Ethan returned. The staff had retired. The house was silent. He stumbled in, looser than usual. His jacket was off, shirt half untucked, a lipstick stain barely visible on his collar. Isabelle stood in the foyer, arms crossed. "Where have you been?" she asked softly. He scoffed, barely making eye contact. "Out. With her? Don't start." She stepped closer. "Do you even remember who I am to you? I've stood by you for 10 years. I've fought for us. I've broken myself to give you something we both wanted. And you failed, he snapped. The words hung between them like poison in the air. She flinched. He stepped forward, towering. Do you want applause for trying, Isabelle? You want a medal for injecting yourself, crying in bathrooms, and coming back empty every damn time. Don't you dare, she started, but he cut her off. You think you're the only one suffering? His voice was cold now. Measured. Every time I see my friends' kids running around their estates, every time I'm asked when we're having one of our own, I feel like a damn fool. I married a woman who can't give me an heir. And everyone knows it. She looked at him like he'd become something inhuman. Is that what I am to you now? She whispered. A defective investment? He turned away, unbothered. I'm going to bed. She didn't stop him. She couldn't. She stood alone in the foyer, tears brimming but not falling. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling again, listening to the wind outside and wondering what it would be like to disappear. Not to die, just to no longer be his anything. Just be. And behind the bedroom wall, Ethan lay with his back turned, staring at the soft blinking light of his phone. Another message from Camille. Another woman who would eventually disappoint him. He didn't know why he was still trying. But the lie was more comfortable than the truth. It was raining the night Isabelle left for good. Not in a dramatic thunderstorm, but a steady, cold drizzle that soaked her thin sweater within minutes of stepping outside. Her luggage sat by the front door, untouched, because there was none. Ethan hadn't allowed her to pack. Not even her coat. Not even her shoes. You're leaving with what you came in with, he said coldly, his voice echoing across the marble floor. This isn't a hotel for barren women. The words carved into her like a scalpel. But she didn't cry. Not anymore. Isabelle looked at him for the last time. His face was unrecognizable, twisted in contempt, hard as stone, a man so consumed by his hunger for legacy that he had turned to ash inside. She had loved him once. And maybe in some broken corner of her soul she still did. But love couldn't live in cruelty. Without another word, she opened the massive front door and stepped into the night. The mansion stood behind her like a mausoleum of what once was. She didn't look back. She walked aimlessly for over an hour, soaked to the bone. The wealthy streets of Greenwich were quiet, gated homes glowing faintly in the mist, their owners asleep or oblivious. Her legs ached, her teeth chattered, and her limbs began to tremble from cold and exhaustion. She had nowhere to go. She had friends once, before Ethan's isolation turned their marriage into a private prison. Most of them had stopped calling when she stopped answering. Her phone had been deactivated after Ethan revoked her account access. She had no credit cards, no cash. Nothing but a wedding ring and the aching weight of 10 wasted years. She ducked into a dimly lit church vestibule, seeking temporary shelter. It smelled of wax and dust. She sat on the wooden bench, trembling, her soaked shoes leaving puddles on the tile floor. Her stomach twisted, empty from not eating all day. For a moment, the darkness swallowed her. Then the door creaked. A woman in scrubs stepped inside, shaking off an umbrella. She paused when she saw Isabelle, blinking at the sight of the drenched, pale woman huddled like a ghost. "Oh my God! Are you okay?" the woman asked, approaching. Isabelle tried to speak but couldn't. Her teeth chattered too violently. Hey, come on. Let's get you warm." Her name was Maya Martins, a nurse working the late shift at a nearby clinic. She wasn't rich, but her heart was vast. She drove Isabelle to her small apartment in Bridgeport, a 2-bedroom with modest furniture, colorful blankets, and the scent of cinnamon and lavender. "I don't know what happened to you," Maya said, handing Isabelle a cup of tea and a dry sweatshirt. "But you're safe here. Just for tonight, okay?" Isabelle nodded, silent. For the first time in hours, she felt human again. The next morning, Maya insisted on taking her to the clinic for a checkup. "You're pale. You've been through something serious. Let me just make sure you're okay." Isabelle resisted, but finally gave in. It was a private women's clinic, quiet, compassionate, run by women who didn't ask too many questions. When the nurse asked about her last period, Isabelle faltered. "It's been a while, she murmured. They ran a test. Routine, standard. Isabelle waited in the small, warm room, her hands clenched in her lap. She expected nothing. Maybe an infection from the stress, maybe fatigue. It wasn't like she could be. The door opened, and the doctor stepped in with a strange smile. Mrs. Bradford, she began gently. You're pregnant. Isabelle blinked, the words not registering. What? The doctor nodded. Early stage. Likely 6 weeks. Did you recently undergo IVF? The breath left her lungs. Her heart thudded. Yes, she whispered. About 7 weeks ago. I thought it failed. The last test was negative. Well, the doctor said kindly, handing her a sonogram appointment card. It didn't. You're expecting. Isabelle sat there in silence, stunned. Her fingers curled around the fabric of her pants. Tears welled in her eyes, not of pain this time, but of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. She walked out into the sunlight, her head tilted to the sky. The rain had cleared. For the first time in what felt like forever, the air didn't feel like punishment. It felt like promise. Maya met her outside, watching her closely. Well, she asked. Isabelle gave her the faintest smile. I'm pregnant. Maya's eyes widened. Oh my God, that's incredible. Isabelle looked down at her hands, then to the sky. It changes everything. That night, she lay on Maya's sofa, hand resting lightly over her stomach. She thought of Ethan, of the empty mansion, of his rage and bitterness. She thought of the way he looked at her like a failure. And then she thought of the life growing inside her. She would not tell him. This child, these children, would not be born into a house of cruelty. She would raise them with peace, with joy, with love, even if she had to start over from nothing. And in the darkness, a single thought bloomed in her heart like a promise. I am not barren. I was never broken. He just didn't deserve to see the miracle in me. The clinic room was silent, save for the soft hum of the sonogram machine. Isabelle lay back, her hands clenched together just above her abdomen, her eyes fixed on the monitor. The cool gel on her stomach barely registered as she held her breath, waiting for the image that would define the next chapter of her life. Maya stood beside her, her hand gently resting on Isabelle's shoulder. The sonographer, a kind older woman with silver hair and soft brown eyes, adjusted the wand and squinted at the screen. Okay, she murmured, a curious note in her voice. Well now, would you look at that? Isabelle's heart stilled. What is it? The woman turned the screen slightly. You're not just carrying one baby. Isabelle's breath hitched. 2. The sonographer smiled, then tilted her head with the wonder of someone who had seen everything, and still marveled. No, dear. 3. The room tilted for a moment as Isabelle tried to comprehend it. 3. Triplets. Her heart exploded into a million emotions: shock, awe, panic, gratitude. She covered her mouth with trembling fingers as tears spilled down her cheeks. 3 babies, she whispered. Yes, ma'am. Strong heartbeats, too. Maya gasped beside her and squeezed her shoulder tightly. Oh my God, Isabelle. That's a miracle. No, Isabelle thought. They were her miracle. The next few months were a blur of adjustment, preparation, and quiet resilience. Maya insisted she stay in her spare bedroom, transforming it into a nursery over time. They shopped secondhand. Friends of Maya donated baby clothes, cribs, bottles. Every item came with a story. Every stitch of fabric was soaked in kindness. Isabelle, once surrounded by diamond-encrusted baby bassinets and elite maternity consultants, now leaned on real people with real hearts, and she was happier than she had ever been. She began to volunteer part-time at a local community center as an art teacher. Painting had always been her escape. Children flocked to her gentleness and warmth. She painted names in soft watercolor for each child growing inside her. Hope. Grace. Elijah. Hope, for what had once been lost but found again. Grace, for what she discovered within herself. And Elijah, the promise of strength carried forward. Meanwhile, back in Greenwich, Ethan Bradford moved through life like a man haunted by shadows of his own design. Rumors began to swirl. He had broken off his latest engagement. The whispers about his inability to father children now circled louder behind cocktail glasses and investor dinners. He grew increasingly angry. Hollow, short-tempered. Every day he'd glance at the grand staircase in his home and imagine a child running down it, his child. But the house remained still. The halls echoed with absence. He hadn't heard from Isabelle since that night. He never bothered to look. Never called. Never cared enough to know. But sometimes, alone in the deep hours of the night, he would find himself looking at old photos on his phone. Her smile. Her laughter. The softness in her eyes. He would toss the phone aside, convincing himself he didn't miss her. But he did. And he had no idea that the legacy he had cursed her for not giving him was already alive and growing. At 35 weeks, Isabelle was admitted to the hospital for observation. The triplets were coming early. Doctors had prepared her, and she had prepared herself. Maya never left her side. The night before the C-section, they sat together, both wide awake. "I'm scared," Isabelle admitted, eyes wide in the sterile, white hospital room. "Of course you are," Maya said. "But you faced worse. You're not just having babies, you're birthing a future. And you're not alone." Isabelle turned to her, eyes glistening. "Thank you for giving me a second chance at life." Maya just smiled. "It wasn't me. It was you. I just opened a door. You walked through it." On a clear spring morning, under the soft glow of the surgical lights, Isabelle gave birth to 3 healthy babies. The doctors smiled. Nurses cooed. Maya wept. Hope was the first, tiny and strong-lunged. Grace came next, calm and observant. And Elijah arrived last, his cry deep and stubborn, just like his father's voice used to be, but filled with a gentleness that Ethan never had. As Isabelle held them against her chest, her heart felt too full for her body. She was no longer the woman thrown out in the rain. She was a mother, a warrior, a builder of futures. That night, while the babies slept swaddled beside her and Maya snoozed in the chair, Isabelle sat in silence. She picked up a pen and journaled for the first time in years. "They are mine. All 3. I won't let the past define them. I won't let his cruelty shape their roots. But one day he will know. He will see what he lost. And I will stand tall, not to punish him, but to prove that I was never broken. Only delayed." The Bradford estate had grown quieter over the years, but it was no longer the dignified stillness of wealth. It was the echoing hollowness of absence. No music. No clatter of silverware during family dinners. No muffled laughter from upstairs. Just silence, like a grand museum no one visited anymore. Ethan Bradford stood at the edge of his home office, staring at the dark window as the city lights of Manhattan glimmered in the distance. He had moved into the city shortly after Isabelle left, claiming he needed to be closer to the pulse of the market. But truthfully, he couldn't stand the ghosts in that mansion anymore. He had won awards, grown his empire, bought stakes in rising tech companies, minted new millionaires, and appeared on the covers of magazines. But nothing filled the gnawing hole inside him. He tried relationships. Camille, Brielle, 1 or 2 women from Europe whose last names he barely remembered. All dazzling, all temporary. None stayed. One even accused him of being emotionally vacant. He laughed at the time, but the words lingered like wine stains on white linen. And still no children. It was a visit to a fertility specialist that finally cracked something open in him. "Let's just run a few updated tests, Mr. Bradford," the doctor had said kindly. "There's no harm." He had agreed. Casually. Dismissively. The results came a week later. Low motility. Structural abnormalities. Unlikely to conceive naturally. Ethan reread the report 3 times, his throat tightening with each line. He stormed out of the clinic. Drove for hours. Drank himself into a haze that night, trying to forget the truth. It wasn't Isabelle. It had never been Isabelle. He was the one who had been unable to father a child. Over the next few months, Ethan's mask of arrogance began to slip in private. His home was filled with objects of power, polished chrome, velvet chairs, custom artwork from Milan. But none of them spoke back to him. None of them hugged him goodnight. None of them made Father's Day cards or played piano recitals. The loneliness became unbearable. He started seeing Isabelle's face in his dreams. Laughing, crying, holding a baby. Sometimes she turned away from him. Other nights she simply vanished. He tried searching for her once, just to see if she was well. But she had disappeared completely. No phone number. No digital trace. Not even on social media. She was gone, as if the earth had swallowed her whole. He sat alone in his penthouse one rainy evening, drink in hand, staring out at the skyline with eyes dulled by sorrow. A knock came at the door. His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, about the gala." "What about it?" he asked without looking up. "We're finalizing the list. Do you want us to extend any personal invitations?" Ethan thought for a moment, his mind drifting to a decade ago. "No," he said flatly. "Let them come if they care." But deep down, there was one name he wished could be there. He took another sip. Far from the glittering skyline of Manhattan, in a cozy brownstone in Jersey City, Isabelle watched her children play in the living room. Hope was carefully organizing her book collection by color. Grace twirled in her pink tutu to music playing from a small speaker. Elijah sat cross-legged on the floor, building a castle out of magnetic blocks. Isabelle leaned in the doorway with a soft smile. Her heart swelled with pride. 10 years of sacrifice had turned into 10 years of joy. She worked now as an art therapist, helping children cope with trauma. She'd built a modest, beautiful life from scratch, with Maya still beside her, now a godmother and honorary aunt. She had told her children the truth in pieces. They knew they had a father. They knew he didn't live with them. And they knew that when the time came, they would meet him. Isabelle was never bitter when she spoke of Ethan. But she never lied. Sometimes people can't see the value of what they have. She once told Elijah when he asked why Daddy wasn't around. But that doesn't mean you aren't valuable. That had been enough. But recently, Isabelle had seen the news of Ethan's upcoming gala, a 20-year celebration of Bradford Technologies. Photos of him looking older, thinner, lonelier. Something in her stirred. Not for his sake, but for the sake of the children. They were ready now, and Ethan needed to see the legacy he threw away. Back in Manhattan, Ethan stood alone in his walk-in closet, preparing for the gala. His tuxedo hung on a gold hanger. His reflection in the mirror looked older, sharper, and infinitely more tired. He picked up his cufflinks, ones Isabelle had given him on their 5th anniversary. He hadn't worn them since. But tonight he would. And far away, 3 children were being dressed by a mother who had rebuilt her soul, her family, and her future. Ready to walk into a room that once rejected her and shine brighter than the chandeliers above it. The ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria in New York City was transformed into a monument of opulence. Cascading crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a soft golden glow. Ice sculptures shaped like circuit boards, and homage to Bradford Technologies' origins, stood at the corners. Waiters glided between guests, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres too expensive to pronounce. It was Ethan Bradford's 20-year gala, a celebration of success, innovation, and empire. Guests from around the world attended. Politicians, tech moguls, venture capitalists, former lovers, all drawn by power or curiosity. And Ethan, in a tailored black tuxedo, played the gracious host. He shook hands, posed for photographs, gave tight smiles, and delivered rehearsed answers. But behind his charm was a man sleepwalking through his own legacy. The room buzzed with wealth. But to Ethan, it all felt hollow. Then, just past 9 p.m., the grand doors at the end of the ballroom opened. No one noticed at first. But slowly, conversations hushed. Heads turned. The pianist faltered mid-chord. She stepped into the room like something out of a forgotten dream. Isabelle, dressed in a floor-length emerald gown that shimmered with each step, her hair pulled into a graceful updo, she walked with unshakable poise. Graceful, regal, whole. Flanking her were 3 children, impeccably dressed. 2 girls in matching ivory dresses with green sashes, Hope and Grace. And between them, a boy in a black suit and emerald bow tie, Elijah. 10 years old. the spitting image of his father, but with his mother's steady, unflinching eyes. The room went silent. Ethan turned. His glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. He froze, as if the past had taken physical form and appeared to haunt him. Isabelle met his gaze. Calm, composed, unafraid. She walked toward him through the crowd, each step like a drumbeat in his chest. The children stayed close to her, clutching her hands. Whispers erupted among the guests. Is that? Those kids they look like. Oh my God, it's Isabelle Bradford. Ethan stared, mouth slightly open, eyes wide with disbelief. When she stopped in front of him, there were no theatrics. No slap. No scream. Just her voice, cool and steady. Hello, Ethan. He dropped to his knees. In front of everyone. The man who had tossed her out with nothing. Who called her Barren. Who spent a decade building walls around his pride. Was now crumbling before her, visibly shaken. I didn't know, he stammered. His voice cracked. Isabelle, I didn't know. She looked down at him, her expression unreadable. You didn't care to know. Tears welled in his eyes. Are they mine? She gestured gently toward the children. These are your children. Hope. Grace. Elijah. Ethan looked at them. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. He tried to speak, but no words came. Elijah stepped forward. He looked up at his father curiously. Are you really him? Ethan nodded, tears streaming now. I think so. The boy tilted his head. Mom said you'd be surprised. A soft laugh spread through the room, breaking the tension like a crack in ice. Isabelle knelt beside her son and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. He just needs time, sweetheart. Ethan looked at her, desperate. Why didn't you tell me? Isabelle stood again, her gaze firm. Because you weren't a safe place then. I had to become one. For them. And for myself. He bowed his head. The cameras were still. The audience silent. No one dared move. I've lived in regret every day, he whispered. Not just for what I said, but for what I lost. I've been empty, Isabelle. She softened slightly, just enough to show the humanity still inside her. I forgave you a long time ago, Ethan. Not for you. For me. But we're not going back. That chapter is closed. Ethan nodded slowly. What happens now? She looked at her children, then back at him. We co-parent. In peace. You can know them. But I will raise them. He swallowed hard and wiped his eyes. And your name, Ethan, she added gently, will be on their inheritance. Not on their character. Later that evening, as the party resumed with hesitant energy, Ethan sat with the triplets in a side lounge, telling them stories about the first computer he ever built. Elijah listened with fascination. Hope asked smart questions. Grace just stared at him, as if still deciding. And Isabelle stood by the window, watching. She hadn't come for revenge. She had come to reclaim her story. To show the world she hadn't vanished. She had risen. The days following the gala were flooded with headlines. Bradford heir reveals shocks tech industry. Triplets at 10, Ethan Bradford's hidden family. Ex-wife returns with heirs, silences critics. Social media buzzed with speculation. Pundits praised Isabelle's grace and composure. Ethan's image, once pristine and unshakable, shifted in the public eye. Sympathy mixed with scorn. Some admired his humility. Others called it too little, too late. But for Isabelle, the media noise was background static. The real work was happening far from cameras, inside quiet, intimate spaces where healing was neither loud nor theatrical. They met in a neutral space, a cozy cafe halfway between Ethan's Manhattan penthouse and Isabelle's Jersey brownstone. No cameras, no assistants, no glamour. Just two people who once built a life together, now sitting face to face as adults parenting the consequences of their past. Ethan looked older in the morning light. Less polished. More real. I can't stop thinking about them, he said quietly. Their voices. The way Elijah asks questions like I used to. The way Hope watches everything like a scientist. Isabelle stirred her tea. They're remarkable. You did that, he said, his voice thick. You raised them into good people. She met his eyes. I raised them into whole people. There's a difference. He nodded, swallowing the hard truth. I was lost. For a long time. Angry. Entitled. And I blamed you for all of it. I know, she said. He searched her face for bitterness, but there was none. Only clarity. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. But I'm asking anyway. I already did. He blinked. I forgave you years ago, she continued, because carrying hate was only hurting me. But forgiveness doesn't mean reunion. We're not getting back together, Ethan. He looked down. I had hoped. She gently touched his hand, just for a moment. You had a version of me in your mind. But the woman you threw out, she died that night. I rebuilt myself. For them. And for me. He nodded again, slowly, tears threatening again. Will you let me be in their lives? Consistently? Yes. They're your children, Ethan. And I want them to know who you are. But there will be boundaries. You won't buy their love. You'll earn their trust. I want that, he said. All of it. Isabelle looked out the window, watching people pass. They're already asking when they can see you again. He smiled, genuinely deeply. I'll be there. Always. Ethan made good on his word. He took the children on weekend outings, science museums with Hope, ballet recitals with Grace, and bookstore hunts with Elijah. Slowly, they warmed to him. He started therapy. He apologized again, this time to them. He showed up for every birthday, every school presentation, every scraped knee and spelling test. Isabelle stayed steady, never controlling, never distant. She let them build their own relationship with him, but remained their anchor. They never lived together again, but a new rhythm formed. Holidays shared. School concerts attended side by side. Family dinners, sometimes awkward, sometimes full of laughter, where past and present sat at the same table. At the children's request, they all attended therapy sessions together once a month. It became tradition, not to fix what had been broken, but to understand it. Isabelle stood in the back of a school auditorium as Elijah stepped up to a podium for his middle school graduation. His speech, chosen by the faculty, was about resilience. He spoke about second chances, about finding peace with pain, about becoming more than your wounds. When he mentioned his parents, both of them, the audience smiled. Ethan, sitting in the front row, turned slightly and looked back at Isabelle. She smiled. And in that moment, without words, he understood. She hadn't just forgiven him. She had liberated herself. And by doing so, she had liberated their children, too. 10 years had passed since Isabelle walked back into Ethan Bradford's life with 3 children who would rewrite his entire legacy. Now, the triplets were 18, standing on the threshold of adulthood, their futures full of promise. The world, once so cruel to their mother, now called them Bradford's miracle. But those who knew the truth understood that the real miracle wasn't in their birth. It was in the quiet strength of the woman who raised them. Hope had earned a full scholarship to MIT. Her research on renewable energy and microscale wind turbines was already being cited in journals. She was brilliant and grounded, always seeking knowledge, never seeking fame. She had Isabelle's introspective nature and Maya's fire. Grace had danced her way into Juilliard. She moved like poetry, every motion telling stories that words never could. She was the peacemaker among her siblings, the emotional compass, and had inherited her mother's quiet empathy, turning pain into beauty on stage. Elijah, bold and curious, had spent the last 3 summers interning at Bradford Technologies. Not because of his name, but because of his potential. Ethan mentored him closely, teaching him not only business, but the humility he had learned the hard way. Elijah was set to attend Wharton in the fall, already seen as the future CEO. Gone were the cold hallways and the sterile perfection. The Greenwich mansion had been renovated, Isabelle's suggestion, now co-owned by a family trust for the children. Laughter echoed down its halls again. Paintings, real ones full of color and life, replaced soulless modern art. The garden Isabelle once dreamed of? It now bloomed with hydrangeas and wildflowers. There were new rules in that home. No raised voices. No closed doors unless asked. No secrets. And every Sunday, the triplets had dinner there, with both of their parents. Ethan had stepped back as CEO and officially named Elijah heir to the company. Not in a press release, not with a gold watch, but in a handwritten letter and a private dinner where he looked his son in the eyes and said, "Don't just build something big. Build something worth inheriting." Isabelle had smiled when Elijah told her. She didn't worry. Not anymore. She had raised a boy who knew the cost of ego and the value of truth. A gala again. But this one was different. It wasn't about business or tech empires. It was a fundraiser for women rebuilding their lives after abandonment, abuse, and trauma. The nonprofit Isabelle had founded with Maya 5 years earlier. It had helped hundreds of women and children find housing, counseling, and freedom. The room was filled with survivors, donors, and supporters. And at the center of it, Isabelle stood, dressed in deep blue silk, her children beside her, Maya at her side, and Ethan in the crowd. No longer a source of pain, but a quiet supporter. As she stepped onto the stage to give her speech, she looked over the crowd. She spoke not as a victim, not even as a mother, but as a woman who had been buried and grown anyway. "I stand here not because life was kind to me, but because I chose to be kind to myself. I am not here to shame anyone. I am here to say, your worth does not vanish when you are rejected. Your legacy begins when you remember who you are, even when the world forgets." The room stood in ovation. Hope, Grace, and Elijah hugged her at once, proud. And Ethan, standing at the back of the room, wiped a tear from his cheek, not of sorrow, but of awe. He had built a company, but she had built a legacy. Isabelle stepped outside into the quiet of the evening. The city hummed, but within her was silence, the peaceful kind. She looked up at the stars and smiled. "They will never inherit your cruelty. Only my grace." We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.